Today, I am going to walk you through A Level Sociology Paper 1. I will be using the 2023 paper and I will be referring to the examiner report for that paper. Now, the examiner report is published after every exam and it will give you some excellent insights to what the examiner was looking for, comments on what the best or the most successful students did, and also what some students did that cost them some marks. Moving on to the front page, let's familiarise ourselves with it. So at the top of the page, you're going to put in all your details. If you are unsure of the centre number and your candidate number, your exam officer or invigilator will have those details for you, so don't panic. In the second part of this page, it does tell you the time allowed, which is 2 hours. You answer all the questions in this booklet. It does also tell you to use black ink, and this is really important because your paper gets scanned in, and it's also important to note that you are not writing outside the box around each page or on the blank pages. Now, you do answer all the questions in the booklet. If you do need extra space, there is lined paper at the back of this booklet. When you use it, make sure you clearly number them. If there isn't enough and you need even more extra paper, you will need to pop your hand up and ask the invigilator for additional answer booklet. Now, a little tip, put your hand up before you need it so you don't lose time writing. Do all your rough work in this booklet, cross out anything you don't want to be marked, and it does tell you how many marks there are for each question. The total number of marks is 80, and any questions that is longer than 10, which is questions 3 onwards, you answer them in continuous prose. Before we look at each question in a little bit more detail, the general comment from the examiner was that the majority of students found this quite accessible. They were able to show a range and depth of knowledge, and the majority had enough time to answer all the questions to the best of their ability. It is really important to note that your handwriting needs to be able to be read by the examiner. Despite our best efforts, answers that cannot clearly be read cannot be credited. Again, remember, this is advice for schools and colleges, that they should be applying for exam access arrangements in advance so these students are not being disadvantaged. Starting with your short questions, question 1 and 2 are your 4 and 6 marker, and they will ask you to outline 2 or 3 things, and this means identify the thing that you're being asked for and briefly explain it to get the full marks available. Now, make it really easy for the examiner to read, so new point, new line. Read the question carefully so you can apply it fully to what the question is asking. Now, this question was asking for similarities between the functionalist and Marxist view of education. Now, this caused a bit of problems for some students because they're often taught that functionalist and Marxist are in contrast with one another. However, the most successful students were able to tackle this quite well and recognise that both the functionalist and Marxist view of education is that education is preparing students for a workforce, but also they both see education as an agency of secondary socialisation. And the most successful students were also able to give examples of how education does this from either the functionalist or the Marxist view, or both. Now, question 2 is also an outline question. This time it's asking you for 3 things, and they put it in bold to remind you. It's asking for 3 criticisms of marketisation policies. Now, according to the examiner report, there was a wide range of answers to this question, and students approached this in one of 2 ways. So some students referred to marketisation policies in general and criticised those. So, for example, a myth of parentocracy, or that some of these policies have led to greater inequalities, as some schools may select students, so cream skimming, for example. Other students took marketisation policies and criticised specific ones. So, for example, League tables might be misleading, they might be inaccurate, pictures of the success of a school. And it's important to note that the least successful students in this question talked about things like privatisation, the tripartite system, policies that weren't marketisation. Now remember, question 1 and 2 should be answered in less than 15 minutes. You possibly will answer them quite quickly, and that will leave you longer for some of the longer questions to answer. As we move on to question 3, this is your 10 marker, and the key focus on this 10 marker is application. And the big tip is that the application is coming from the item, and it tells you it 3 times, here, here, and here. Now, what you are looking for in the item is the word after the to. So in this case, it's the ways that the hidden curriculum. Also read the question very carefully as well, because you'll need to link it back to that. In this case, it's reproducing the social class structure. Now, you don't need an introduction or conclusion with this, just 2 clear paragraphs. You're spending 15 minutes to answer, and just a little reminder, even though it says the word analyse, there is also marks available for evaluation. Now, generally, this question was answered well. The majority of students were able to recognise the hooks in the item. So, for example, the hook, which was schooling, pupils are told everyone has the same opportunity to succeed. They were able to develop this with a discussion of Bowles and Gintis' theory of the myth of meritocracy. Students were also able to develop this further and explain it using examples of the hidden curriculum, such as labelling, setting and streaming, and how that contributes to this myth of meritocracy. Now, the most successful answers were then able to link it back to the question, how is it reproducing the social class structure? Because they might say the working class are more likely to be placed in the lower stream and miss out on the top knowledge, the high status knowledge, and that will prevent them from moving up in the social structure. Now, there are some students that were using this sentence from the item. This is not a hook. This is just a reminder to link back to the question. So any students that use this as a hook would not be credited. And finally, a small number of students ignored the item and made no reference to the hooks at all, and as a result they were unable to achieve any marks in the 4 to 7 level or higher. And the least successful answers drifted to the functionalist explanations. They picked up about meritocracy but were unable to say how it linked to reproducing the social class structure. And some students also drifted into external factors with no reference at all to the hidden curriculum. Now, as we move on to question 4, this is our 30 mark question and you have got 45 minutes to answer it. Now, a few top tips for this one. Make sure that you are reading the question carefully. Do that more than once, and the same with the item. Use the space below it. Use as much as you need to make a plan. I did read on an examiner report that students that did plan their answers, they tended to be better answers. They tend to be more logical, and they ended up flowing a little bit more better. Using the item to stimulate your thinking, connect your knowledge to it. It is there to give you clues to what you can write about. Make sure that you are getting a range of different explanations about what the question is asking, using studies, concepts, keywords to support, and make sure that you are linking back to the question. So, for example, here, the importance of cultural factors. There is marks available for analysis and evaluation, and make sure that your evaluation is quite critical rather than just giving an opposing view. End your answer with a strong conclusion or a judgment. Referring back to this question will help frame that judgment. Now, this question was a fantastic question because students were able to draw upon different knowledge from a range of different topics from the education unit. A lot of students talked about speech codes, or Sugarman's subcultural values, or Bordeaux's work on cultural capital, and linking it to patterns of educational achievement. However, some students were unclear about what actually was and isn't a cultural factor. So, for example, some students saw cultural factors as being synonymous with external factors and structured their answers around an external versus internal factors and explaining differential achievement between these social groups. And many of these answers did not explain how these internal factors, such as labelling, is actually linked to cultural factors. Some of these students also offered bolt-on evaluation without any clear explanation for the relevance for this question. So remember, you are addressing the debate, the importance of cultural factors. And a lot of students did focus their answers around social class, with a little bit of reference to ethnicity, and any students that did refer to gender was presenting it as an alternative argument and not linking it to the cultural factors debate. Now, it is important to note that quite a lot of students, and this is a large number of students, referred to material factors as evaluation, but it was juxtaposed. Now, what do we mean by that? It means that they had a separate paragraph which was all about material factors, and they gave lengthy explanations of what these material factors were, but they didn't link it back to the question, the importance of the cultural factors. So even though the better students, what they did was that they give a range and depth of cultural factors, and they were able to explain how the material factors may underpin the cultural factors. They may compensate cultural factors, or that material and cultural factors are actually intertwined. So that means the most successful students were able to provide further explicit evaluation of these cultural factors that were being outlined. So, for example, cultural deprivation explanations are often accused of being victim blaming, or these explanations don't always account for why some groups of students still manage to achieve well despite being culturally deprived. As we move on to question 5, this is the method in context, and it is my most favourite question on the whole paper. You have got 20 marks available with 30 minutes to answer. And the biggest tip that I can give you is that you can gain roughly half the marks from the method. So make sure that you are addressing the strengths and weaknesses practically, ethically and theoretically. But whilst you are doing this, make sure that you are applying it to the school context. Okay, so remember, it is in context of education. So imagine that you are doing the research yourself, and what issues and problems are arising. So make sure you link it into the characteristics of the people, such as the teachers, the pupils, the parents, and even the school itself, the classrooms, the staff rooms, corridors and pupils' homes. Now, as we look at the item, it does give you clues to help you answer this question. The first part of the item gives you the context. This is the education context, and in this case, it's the pressure on pupils to achieve the high grades and where this pressure might come from. And you've got to be thinking, well, if you're asking students about where this pressure is coming from, are they going to be honest? Are they going to be able to articulate it? And what do we mean by pressure? How do we measure it? The second part of the item is about the method, and it gives you some hints and tips for you to develop your knowledge on from there. So as we look at the examiner report, this question showed a range of knowledge and understanding of strengths and limitations of self-completion questionnaires. Many students were able to outline the strengths and limitations linked to practical issues, cost and distribution, response rate and accuracy gained from self-completion questionnaires. While some were able to develop these strengths and limitations using the correct language, others did confuse concepts such as validity and reliability. So I would be reminding students, teachers, just recap as much as possible about those two definitions to make sure that your students are really clear about what valid and reliability means. It also mentions that some students made assertions about self-completion questionnaires not being valid, whereas your better answers were able to explain the issues of validity and reliability being more nuanced. Now, very similar to previous exams, a lot of students were able to develop some of these strengths and limitations to the issues of studying education more generally. And a lot of students did talk about that self-completion questionnaires are more likely to get permission from the gatekeeper, and they're less likely to interrupt lessons in some ways compared to other method. Now, the most successful students, because that's what we want to know about, were able to apply the strengths and limitations to the specifics of the issues in the question. So, for example, self-completion questionnaires are often private and anonymous, and your respondents, such as the students, may be more likely to express their opinions about the pressures that the parents or teachers might be putting on them without fear of any repercussions or upsetting them. Additionally, some were able to develop this issue of operationalising, this was from the item, and explaining the issue with measuring and defining pressure and high grades when completing a questionnaire with the absence of a researcher that may be able to clarify any misunderstanding. Now, your final question is a theory and methods question, and this is a separate section, and that's why there is the bold heading. Now, on this question, you are asked to outline and explain two things. You will be given two clear paragraphs. You've got 15 minutes to answer, and the focus is of application of knowledge, so applying the reason to the method that produces quantitative data. So give examples of the method here or studies that might have used them. Now, marks are only available for analysis, and this is gained by linking further ideas and concepts to create a deeper explanation. You've got 15 minutes to answer this. Now, according to the examiner reports, it was saying that it's pleasing to see the vast majority of students were able to attempt this question, which is indicating better time management, or this question was actually more accessible compared to other questions in previous exam series. There was a range of different reasons offered for why sociologists might choose to use methods that produce quantitative data. A number of answers did provide a list of reasons, but the most successful answers focused on two and were able to develop these with concepts and examples to illustrate. For example, some students explained that methods produce quantitative data are more likely to establish cause and effect relationships, and this data is favoured by positivists who prefer to study social facts. And then they use this data to be able to make predictions about human behaviour in society. And some were able to apply examples such as Durkheim's study of suicide to illustrate this argument. Now, just a key thing that we need to remember is that there are still a number of students that are evaluating on an outline and explain. Students should be reminded that there is no marks for evaluation in this question type. So put simply, if there is an item, you evaluate. If there's no item, no evaluation. So as you get to the end of this booklet, you will see there is a spare page. It tells you don't write on this. And then here are the additional pages that are included in your booklet that you use if you run out of space. Just make sure that you are using the correct question number for this also. So massive thank you for watching. Click like, share, comment, save, and also check out my TikTok because I am doing daily TikToks on exam questions and how to answer them as well. All right, thank you so much. Bye bye.